We haven't heard him on our favourite docudrama for a little while, but you never know. We might be hearing from him sometime in the future. He was a favourite. He'd been on the show for eons, and he was our favourite milkman. He was a little bit crabby. He mourned the death of his wife, and then got a new one. Traded her in for a younger model. We're talking about Mike Tucker. It's Terry Molloy. How are you, sir?
I don't know what you're talking about. I haven't a clue what you're talking about. Who? Mike who? I'm fine, thank you, Roifield. Very well, thank you.
Good. Well, this show is called My First Day on Set.
Yeah.
So, before we go to your first day on set, you have to tell us what you were doing before you ever entered the world of Ambridge.
Before I entered the world of Ambridge, I was working in theatre. I just started to do a fair amount of radio. I was at a theatre in Stoke-on-Trent, the Victoria Theatre, which was run by Peter Cheeseman, and I was there for about 2.5 years, doing all kinds of wonderful stuff. Because in those days, the Victoria Theatre was a bit like Joan Littlewood at Stratford. It really buzzed with documentary drama and stuff to do with the community and whatever. And it was all in the round as well, which I'd grown up with when I first started working in theatre, working with children's theatre, which we did in the round. So to me, it was very natural. And I kind of finished my time there, and I was offered a job in Birmingham, would you believe, at the Midlands Arts Centre. So I went down there to work there, and at the same time I'd had Tony Cornish, who was then radio producer for the Midlands in Pebble Mill. He'd come to see me in a show, and he offered me in one of the Saturday night theatres. So my first experience of working on radio, which I found hysterical. I mean, I found it very interesting, but also hysterical at one point because I was playing the villain. And we had that terrible moment at the end where it's, all right, sir, I've got this gun now and you're going to get bang. And then I die with it. Ah! But as I died, the spot effects man next to me just collapsed onto the floor. And I just burst out laughing. What's he doing? That's the sound of the body falling. Because I'd never sussed this, they got this spot effects man whose sole thing was to provide the effects, the close-in effects that we needed. So it was great. And then I worked several times with Tony. At the same time, I'd started working at the Midlands Arts Centre as an associate director there, doing all kinds of things from the resistible rise of Arturo Ui to Joe Orton plays, to mad sort of send-ups of the Marx Brothers in the open air with a kids program called The Legend of Tangalali with we couldn't say Tarzan, so we had to call him Tarak, who used to swing across burning fires and attack Groucho Marx and his hombres as they were trying to steal away the lovely lady. And out of the blue, I got this phone call from the Archer's office. And they said, would you mind coming in? We'd like to talk to you about the possibility of something in the Archers. And I went, yeah, okay. At that time I wasn't thinking too strongly about anything really. And so I went in and I discovered that Tony Cornish had recommended me to Tony Shryan for this part in the Archers, a character called Mike Tucker, who was a sort of a bolshy kind of union man. And I went in and, I'd listened to the Archers when I was a kid because my parents used to listen to the Archers, so I knew all about the Archers, but I didn't really listen to it myself. But suddenly I was faced with Dan and Doris in the studio, and those voices were there, I'm going, wow, and they gave me this scene to do where I was having a ding-dong with Dan Archer about, tied cottages or something or other. Can't remember it exactly now, but it was a fairly sort of full-on kind of yeah, we're doing this and I'm doing that. And at the end of it, they came out and said, that's fine, that's lovely. You'll start tomorrow and your fee will be 6 guineas for an episode.
Guineas.
In guineas, yes, we were paid in guineas.
I thought the Archers started in 1951, not 1851.
Yeah, well, close to it. I mean, there was still... I don't believe it, but this was 1973, 74. What I didn't realise was that the character of Mike Tucker had already been cast. It had been cast with an actor called Gareth Armstrong, who actually later turned up in Ambridge as the postman, Harry Booker. And then again as one of the gay owners of the Cat and Fiddle later on. And he'd done a couple of episodes and then said, sorry, I can't do this anymore because I've got a job with the Radio Rep, so I'm not going to be available. So suddenly they'd got a couple of episodes in the can and they had to now recast the character quickly. And what they were doing was actually playing the same episode back in the box as I was actually doing it on mic with Dan and Doris, And, I'd get notes like, can you just make him a little lower, a bit slower, whatever. And they came out and they said, yes. So they obviously they thought the match was there. So that was it. A day or so later, I was in the studio working on the Archers, which I was told very specifically it'll be for about 5 weeks.
Wow, that's a very long, elastic 5 weeks. So tell us... Tell us about physically walking into Pebble Mill that first time, and what was the studio like? And you said that you heard the voices of the actors that played Dan and Doris, but how much direction did you get? Give us a whole sense and feeling back of walking into the door, and then delivering that those first few lines.
I'd worked at Pebble Mill already. Pebble Mill was a new broadcast centre, so it was all very new and modern. And Studio 3, which is...
and this is 1974, yeah?
It's 73, 74, yeah. The Studio 3 was at the far left-hand side. As you go in the main building, you go down this corridor and turn left. And the left-hand side is the radio side, and the right-hand side was the television side. So you had this massive foyer, and you were either directed left or right, or forward if you were going to administration. So on the left-hand side, we had a massive studio for music, for, things like the Birmingham Symphony Orchestra and all kinds of, choral pieces and what have you. Now, at the very end, there was a little studio which was used for people like Humphrey Lyttelton doing his jazz program, and then the drama studio, which was on the left, right in the corner of the building. And it was really state-of-the-art stuff, It was all beautiful. We had these stairs that went up the corner of the studio to nowhere. 3 sets of stairs. One was stone, one was wood with carpet on it, and the other one was metal. So you could get any kind of sense of feet going up and down these stairs, and it went to nowhere except to a door at the top, which sort of opened on itself and closed again. It was there were lots of screens around the place. There was one end was parquet floor, which is what you might call the hard end of the studio, and had very big drapes, very big curtains that could be pulled across to cut off the hard end from the soft end. So the hard end was very much where you would do scenes that involved village halls and things like that. That would be the any sort of drama that involved the inside of a building. And then on the soft end, which was all carpeted near the steps, it was broken off into screens which delineated different living areas. So you'd have an area in the corner. There was an Aga, so there was an actual Aga there on the floor. Didn't work, but it made all the noises that an Aga would make. And then you got another area by the sink, which would be where the kitchen would be, and you could do washing up and opening fridge doors and stuff like that, and putting kettles on. And then at the extreme right of the studio, there was this tiny little room, which got stone floors, sort of marble floors. and it was covered in the most incredibly thick foam, which was angled like prisms in all directions. And this was what we called the dead room. Not because people died there, but there was actually no acoustic. So the smallest room in the studio was the place where you did the biggest outdoor scenes, because there was no bounce back at all. It all got swallowed up by this foam. So anything that was done outside in a field, or in a drama, if you're in the middle of a town or something, that was all done in the dead room. So yeah, my first experience, well, it wasn't my first experience because I'd done a couple of radio dramas there already. So I knew the studio, and I knew a bit about working on radio. But in those days we worked in mono, so we had a sort of the old BBC mic where one person was on one side and one was on the other, and you faced each other and you talked to the other person. So there was this conversation going on. If you moved round to what they call the dead side of the mic, which was on this side or that side, you disappeared. So you could use that if you were moving away, to go away. You disappeared off, or you backed away to get that sense of leaving where you were. So it was very an intimate thing that you were dealing with the other person. It was a bit like doing a play, in that you were doing it face to face with somebody. If you had several scenes, then obviously you had people would bob in and bob out depending on who was actually speaking at any one time. But that was choreographed as you did the rehearsal for the thing. So the first thing you do when you come in is you sit down in the little green room, which was outside in this foyer area, and we would read through, and everyone would be there, and Tony Shrine, who was then the producer, and his PA would sit there and time the entire episode, scene by scene. So we ran the whole thing through, so they got a timing on the scene, so if anything needed to be cut, it could be cut. They could make their changes before you actually went into the studio, or do them when you got to the studio, and they'll just say, right, cut. The interesting thing about the scripts is that they were printed out, but you had numbers all down the side for each line of the script. So it was very easy for them to give you the direction. Page 4, line 12, can you change at to in? So you knew exactly where to go. It was very, very quick shorthand of finding where you were in the script. And we went in, and you'd done the read-through, and you went in scene by scene, usually. They were generally done in order. And in those days, they were recorded on tape. So everything was recorded in order. But because it was in tape, in the early days of the Archers, they used to do them on wax discs. So you had to do the entire episode without making a fluff. If you made a mistake, you had to go back, start the entire episode again, and go through.
So it was almost like the theatre then, if you had to just do it in one take.
Yeah, absolutely. So, God help the actor who actually fluffed on the last line of the episode. Everyone had to go back. But in my day, when I arrived, it was very much tape, reel to reel tape, and that was then they would edit that almost as they went. They'd be cutting bits out. If there was a fluff, they'd cut it out as they were going, and stitch it together again and carry on.
Were you nervous at all? Obviously, you'd been to Pebble Mill before. You were a good jobbing actor already by then. But were you nervous? You said that you knew what the Archers was. You used to listen to it as a wee young pup. Was there any sense of I'm going into an institution back then? Because even then, it'd been running for some 22, 23 years.
Yeah. Not in that respect. I wasn't overawed in the way that, oh gosh, it's this iconic program. The only kind of nerves and things I had, which I would have on any job, is I've got to make this right. I've got to present the character. Don't fall over the words. I've always been very adept at sight reading. In fact, when I read an audio book, I tend to read actually about 4 lines ahead of what I'm actually speaking.
Wow.
Because it's a bit like chess. because you're preparing the next bit as the voice is going out. You've done that, that's gone out of the way, and we're looking at the next bit that's coming up so you don't fall over it. And you're preparing that, although you'll have done prep on it anyway before you go into the studio. But for me, it's always been a facility I've had. As when I was a musician, I used to be able to do, playing sax and clarinet. I could do glass blower breathing, so I could hold a note forever and ever and ever. Can't do it now, but in those days, yeah. And so yeah, I was just concerned that what I was doing fitted in within what was happening there, and I was doing what they wanted me to do.
Obviously, Mike started off as this union guy, and then ended up. I remember him, and I know we talked about this before, but when I really remember him, he was just a miserable old sod, and he did mellow towards the end, and he became a father before he departed off to Birmingham. What do you think? Just before we wrap this up, in all your years playing Mike, what do you think you actually added to the character of Mike? What do you say Terry brought to Mike Tucker?
I think I probably brought to him eventually a kind of an essence of new man and fragility, because when he started, he was basically Mr. Macho. He suffered fools with no gladness, only opened his mouth to change feet, generally, and he considered he was a patriarch and people did what he told them in the family. Little did he know that actually Betty ran the roost and wound him around her finger. And when he met up with Vicky, so as I matured and grew with the character and within my own family and everything, because it was interesting the way my Tucker family mirrored my own family, in that they were born, my children were born about the same time as the Tucker children were born, perhaps a year or two out of sync, but they were there, and that gave me a sense of connection with the character, because it was in my life. And obviously you can't just produce a caricature. It's got to come from you, and there's got to be an honesty from within. And the more work I did, and the more work I did on radio, the more I was able to use radio and know what I was actually doing with a particular speech in producing the emotion that was needed, and in basically talking to the one person who's listening at the other end of the microphone. It's not a big audience, it's one person. I'm in your home. I'm painting the picture for you orally, and you are seeing me in whatever glory you choose to see me. And the number of times people have come up to me and looked at me and gone, Mike Tucker? Nah, damn it. Because I'm not, what a lot of people consider Mike Tucker to be, And or a lot of people can say, oh, you're really rather nice, aren't you? I said, yeah, sometimes. I can still be a moaning old sod, though. And the older I get, I'm a grumpy old fart. So I'm going back to where I started from.
Hey, Terry Molloy, thank you for coming on to my first day on set and telling us all about the glory and the wonder of that studio back in 1973, or was it 74, back at Pebble Mill, and breathing life back into the character of Mike Tucker, who's dearly missed. And let's hope that one day he decides to pay a visit to his son Roy back in Ambridge.
Well, who knows, eh? I mean, I'm sure they still need milk in there. Or a few trees chopping down.